Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the EU Energy Days here at COP28. It's a pleasure to see so many of you at what is a very important event and with a very impressive lineup. So thank you very much to everyone for joining. And thank you, of course, in particular to our esteemed speakers for joining this event on the reduction of methane emissions. 2 years ago, the EU and the US jointly launched the Global Methane Pledge. And now, 2 years later, more than 150 countries have joined, and we have taken decisive action to follow up on this to make sure that we implement the Global Methane Pledge, our commitment to reduce methane emissions. Within the European Union, we have done that by different pieces, different actions, but one of the important actions is to adopt legislation on the reduction of methane emissions, on securing that we have monitoring, measurement and verification of methane resulting from the energy sector in particular. Commissioner Simpson will say more about that shortly. Why is the reduction of methane emissions so important? Well, methane is 86 times more, has 86 times more warming potential compared to CO2. It was responsible for around 30% of the rise in global temperatures since the Industrial Revolution, and the energy sector accounts for a very large share of that. 40% of methane emissions from human activity come from the energy sector. The good thing about that is we can act. We can act against that. We can reduce methane emissions, and a lot has already happened over these last 2 years. I have the honor to open with an intervention from Dr. Fatih Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, who has done a lot of work on methane, on reducing methane emissions. So Fatih, please join us here. Thank you very much.
Particularly because there is,
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dite. This is a great pleasure to talk about methane emissions, one of the really important topics in the IEA work, and it's a great pleasure to have such a wonderful lineup. But my special thanks to go to Minister Al-Molla. Mr. Minister, may I take this opportunity to thank you, being an associate member of the International Energy Agency. We recently signed a joint work program, and the great work that your country is doing on energy, but also beyond. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. So, dear colleagues, as our colleague Dieter mentioned, methane is a very important greenhouse gas. Its importance is not very much appreciated. But if I can give you one number, you can understand how important it is. This number comes from the work of my colleague Christophe McGlade. The temperature increase up to now, what the world has experienced, and which puts us in a very much difficulty and under pressure to find a solution. This temperature increase that we are experiencing today, more than 30% is due to methane. So not a small number, more than 30% of the global increase in the temperature comes from methane, as such very important. And it's mainly coming from the energy sector, oil, gas, and also coal mines. We just had a meeting this morning with our Chinese partners to talk about the methane coming from coal mines. But the energy sector, oil and gas sector, has an important role to play. In fact, when we look at the oil and gas sector, industry, emissions, total greenhouse gas emissions coming from the oil and gas sector, from their own operations, extracting the oil and gas, refining and distributing. Not about the consumption, but from their own operations, namely so-called Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions, are about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is more or less equal to what the total greenhouse gas emissions of the United States is today. So oil and gas industry, and we very much hope that the oil and gas industry, there are lots of discussions on this, before this COP, at this COP, and we really hope that the oil and gas industry comes with a commitment in line with their responsibilities, and our wish as the International Energy Agency is that those Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions from the oil and gas industry to be reduced by 60% by 2030. This is our hope to get this message from the oil and gas industry. And we believe that the big chunk of these emission reductions can be done in a cost-effective way in general, especially methane emissions. And here, what we are doing at the IEA, through different methodologies, including the satellites data, we look at every single country and each sector, how much each country is emitting methane. What is their responsibility to global methane emissions? And we are tracking it very closely. And what is really impressive is that there are some companies and countries who are doing a good job in terms of methane emissions, and there are some companies and countries doing not a so good job. And this is not the interesting thing. Interesting thing is the emissions per unit coming with a good job and bad job is a factor of 100. So 100 times a difference between a best performer and the worst performer. You don't see it often in the energy industry. There is such a big difference. And we think methane emissions, to fix these methane emissions, is much easier than many other mitigation efforts. I shouldn't say much easier, I should say maybe less difficult than the fixing the other problems we are today facing in terms of emission reductions, and it is many of them are cost effective. Again, our analysis, country by country, sector by sector analysis show that by 2030, the world can minimize, if not nullify, the total methane emissions for a cost of $75 billion US. 75 billion US dollars. It's a big money or a small money. It depends on who you are. But just put in a context, last year, the oil and gas revenues of the oil and gas industry in the world was about 4 trillion US dollars. And we need to fix this problem, 75 billion US dollars. It is about 2% of these revenues that the companies has registered last year. So perhaps one last word on the EU. Many thanks for EU for putting this methane issue on the agenda. And this proposed the EU legislation on the methane emission is, I believe, is going to be a good driver for many of the exporters and give an important impetus there. But I am sure many exporters of natural gas to Europe and other countries will consider this legislation as a first in the row, as Europe always does. Many other countries may well follow suit. So many thanks to all of you, and for the IEA, methane is very important and we'll follow up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatih, Dr. Birol, Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, for setting the scene so clearly when it comes to the role of methane, the challenges and opportunities in the energy sectors. With that, I would like to open the keynote speeches, and we start with Commissioner Kadri Simpson, European Commissioner for Energy, who has been leading this effort to establish European regulation to reduce methane emissions, starting, of course, with the measurement, the monitoring, the verification, because what you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So, Commissioner Simpson, Kadri, please, over to you.
Thank you, Tita, and thank you, Dr. Birol, for also your special report addressing methane. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to discuss together some of the great examples of positive developments on curbing methane and what else we need to do. Science makes it clear that there is no time to waste in stopping methane emissions, and otherwise we will not live up to our 1.5 degree commitment. And as we all know, methane is a greenhouse gas that is 86 times more potent than CO2. As a precursor to harmful atmospheric pollutants, it is responsible for hundreds of thousands of premature deaths. And so there are many benefits to global energy security when methane is collected and commercialized. Indeed, in Europe, we have a good story to tell. We have just adopted our first ever methane law covering oil, gas, and coal sectors from upstream to downstream. And I can already say that this is a great success story. Our new law sets out world-class standards for measurement, reporting, and verification, leak detection and repair, and bans venting and routine flaring. And it deals with everything from long-abandoned, flooded coal mines to undersea gas pipelines. And it will ensure a major drop in the EU methane emissions from the energy sector. However, as EU is only accounting for 6% of the global methane emissions in the energy sector, this is why we have focused also on our role as largest oil and gas importer. First, we will immediately step up our diplomatic outreach with super emitters, thanks to our collaboration with the Methane Alert and Response System managed by the International Methane Emissions Observatory. We will keep our member states and companies regularly updated so that they can use this information to inform purchasing decisions. Second, in late 2024, importers into the EU will have to report on the geographic route and associated methane emissions, as well as how those emissions were measured. And third, in late 2025, the European Commission will publish a methane transparency database. And in mid-2026, based on the database, we will publish methane performance profiles of each company and country. And fourth, from 2027, importers will have to show that producers were subject to equivalent measurement, reporting, and verification requirements. And this will be based on the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, and this is the most robust and representative existing framework, covering today over 115 companies, representing over 35% of the world's oil and gas production, and over 70% of LNG flows. And finally, following a full review of the legislation, from the beginning of 2030, imports into the EU of oil, gas, and coal will be required to meet a methane intensity threshold. And all of this was developed to ensure that as fossil fuel market becomes less tight in the next few years, we only import low emission fuels. This regulation gives us the tools to make this happen. And on top of all of this, we are stepping up our funding and engagement to reduce methane emissions globally. A few points also here. First, the European Commission is putting 200 million euros towards an overall Team Europe contribution of 250 million euros to help developing and middle-income countries. Second, through You Collect, We Buy, we are incentivizing oil and gas companies to collect and commercialize gas that would otherwise be wasted, because more than 260 BCM of gas is wasted right now every year. And we are starting with our partners in the Mediterranean, and I'm very happy that we have our partner, Minister of Energy from Egypt right now with us. And as our President Ursula von der Leyen announced, by COP29, we will launch a roadmap that can be implemented worldwide, but we are already beginning to work with our partner countries. And third, on a multilateral level, beyond our co-chairing of the Global Methane Pledge, we are working with partners to create a globally aligned framework to measure greenhouse gas emissions, particularly methane, in global gas and oil supply chain. So ladies and gentlemen, we have built some good momentum on methane emissions, and thanks to new technologies, but also efforts of governments and NGOs and private sector, this momentum is here. And since the launch of the Global Methane Pledge, the European Union has shown the commitments are now turned into action. And more than ever, we are ready to accelerate our work to stop methane emissions in the oil, gas, and coal sector. And I urge all of you to take the next step and lead the march forward, not just in Europe, but all 150 signatories to the Global Methane Pledge and all oil and gas companies worldwide. So I do believe that we will have a very good panel now led by Dite. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Commissioner Kadri Simpson, European Commissioner for Energy, for outlining so clearly the ambitious framework that the European Union has established, but also outlining the important partnership with countries that export fossil to the European Union. And here I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tarek El Molla, the Egyptian Minister for Petroleum and Mineral Resources, one of our close partners and a friend of Europe, I think, across the Mediterranean. So please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Commissioner Kadri Simpson, EU Energy Commissioner, thank you for the invite. Your Excellency, Dr. Fatih Birol, IEA Secretary General, thank you for acknowledging Egypt and accepting Egypt to be an association country and acknowledging the efforts that we are doing currently with the methane abatement. Excellencies, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, please allow me to express my appreciation to the EU for hosting today's event, which endorses the efforts of governments, energy industry leaders, and international organizations to create new business opportunities in the context of methane emissions abatement and to stimulate innovation and growth for the energy industry. In this rapidly changing world, where global challenges such as the energy trilemma and the climate change are constantly evolving, multilateral cooperation is becoming increasingly crucial, driving the energy industry stakeholders to develop more efficient strategies, share research and best practices, coordinate actions, and find effective solutions for producing, using, and delivering cleaner energy sources. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the Egyptian government continues to strongly support global efforts to combat climate change, adapt to its negative effect, and build on the international momentum for methane abatement. Reducing methane emissions is one of the fastest ways to decrease global warming. Additionally, eliminating wastes, fugitive emissions, and flaring, all to support in providing affordable and sustainable energy sources. Most methane emissions reduction projects are technically feasible with current technologies. Yet, concessional finance remains a key requirement for supporting methane abatement efforts and projects, especially at developing countries like Egypt. In view of its high global warming potential, Egypt's energy sector has placed importance to reduce methane emissions, particularly through flare gas recovery. Methane abatement is also considered a key element within the low-carbon carbon strategy of Egypt, particularly for reducing the carbon intensity of Egypt's oil and gas resources. In this respect, Egypt joined the World Bank's initiative for zero routine flaring by 2030 and succeeded to implementing around 30 projects for recovering flared gas and eliminating routine flaring. These projects resulted in annual savings of around $200 million and emission reductions of 1.4 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. Furthermore, and in run up to COP27, Egypt's nationally determined contributions were issued to include quantified emission reduction targets. These targets captured the importance placed for recovery of flared gas to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, including methane, where the quantified targets were set at achieving 65% reduction in the oil and gas sector emissions by 2030, mainly through recovery of associated petroleum gas. During the Major Economies Forum held in June 23, His Excellency President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi announced that Egypt has joined the Global Methane Pledge in the oil and gas track, through which Egypt will seek to enhance its efforts to reduce methane emissions from the oil and gas sector based on the expertise and funding provided by the initiative and in cooperation with our international partners. Subsequently, and during the first ever Decarbonization Day that was organized last year at COP27 by Egypt, a specific session was dedicated to discuss different ways to advance the Global Methane Pledge. During this session, Egypt launched the Sharm el-Sheikh Oil and Gas Methane Reduction Roadmap template to drive near-term methane emissions reduction and close gaps to achieve medium-term impact, which was developed through technical support from the Global Methane Hub. We will follow up this template to develop a detailed methane reduction roadmap for Egypt through technical support from USTDA. Moreover, building upon Egypt's oil and gas sector decarbonization pillar for methane abatement, 2 methane measurements campaigns were conducted through technical assistance from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, and covered more than 30 production sites. The results of these campaigns were actually very promising, as it revealed that the fugitive leaks are less than the global benchmark limits, and that companies are applying periodic leak detection and repair programs. In addition, the results also pointed to the priority areas for getting the maximum reduction, namely tanks, as well as fugitive emissions from compressors and venting. We are also working with our key strategic partners, like E&I, to conduct further measurements campaigns, share best practices, and build capacity for the sector calibers for methane abatement. Excellencies, distinguished guests, I would like to reiterate the importance of continued collaboration between the energy industry stakeholders, especially for availing concessional finance, technologies, and capacity building to support the decarbonization of the energy industry. Our joint presence here today reaffirms that the case for action for methane abatement is clear. It is important to continue leveraging on the valuable data and insights provided by leading energy institutions such the IEA and International Methane Emission Observatory, as well capitalize on the technical assistance and funding opportunities provided by the EU and its financing entities. I would also like to thank everyone for their presence today. This event proves the joint efforts, alignment, and amicable relationships of all our distinguished partners who have always been keen on fostering cooperation. I am certain that together we can overcome our common challenges, unlock new opportunities, and promote the welfare of whole humanity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Minister El Molla for providing the perspective from Egypt, including the economic opportunities in reducing methane emissions by collecting vented or flared gas. With that, I would like to give the floor to you, Stefan Wenzel, State Secretary from Germany for Economy, Energy and Climate Action. Please.
Thank you very much, Dieter Jørgensen. It's a pleasure for me to speak here together with Minister Molla and General Secretary Fatih Birol to the methane situation. Methane is a very strong greenhouse gas, and so it's very good to work together on this on a worldwide level. Today, I'm speaking to you as one of 5 champions of the Global Methane Pledge with a great message. Germany intends to provide 20 million euros in grants for methane mitigation worldwide. We want to grant 8 million euros at the package intended for the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. Germany's successful cooperation with the CCAC is in the waste sector, where we are working in the national sector since 20 years, will be continued. Funds will also be available to assist partner countries in setting up the regulation of the fossil fuel industry. And 12 million euros of our methane contribution are intended for the International Methane Emissions Observatory, IMEO, to increase our knowledge of methane sources and ability to surveil the practices of individual companies. Our modern satellites today have very interesting options to identify emissions all over the world. And that's a very important project to come up with our goals. As said before, the energy sector has massive methane mitigation potential, often at zero or low cost. We must make use of this significant potential. We must picking those low-hanging fruits. Phasing out fossil fuels, starting with coal, and that is our primary goal. Renewable energy and energy efficiency, you always said energy efficiency is first, and that's a really big amount we can save there with energy efficiency, are the way forward, and all companies should rethink their fossil fuel engagement on these places. Because, for example, if you go into a bank today, you're visiting a bank as a company and you're asking for a credit, they will ask you for your scope 1, for your scope 3, for your scopes 2 and your scope 3. And that will decide about the amount of interest you have to pay in the future, or about the decision if you get in credit. And the oil and gas company made a pledge, for example, for scope 1 and 2, but we are waiting for a pledge for scope 3. And this is the biggest amount. Scope 3 is about 90% of the whole emissions of oil and gas. And so it would be good first to pick these low-hanging fruits we're talking about here. The renewable energy potential, particularly in Northern Africa, for example, is unimaginable vast, and its development includes huge business opportunities for well-established and future-oriented companies in the region. We are open for joint progress with the private sector to both fight climate change as well as contribute to global energy security. But while downsizing the fossil fuel industry and phasing out by mid-century, we must nevertheless invest in cleaning up business practices of the oil and gas industry today, because demand reductions will not cut methane emissions fast enough. Investments and regulation to achieve methane mitigation are essential if we want to reverse the current emission trends. Venting and flaring must come to an end, and existing infrastructure needs to comply with rigorous leak detection and repair programs. However, we also need to address the CO2 emissions of the fossil fuel value chain. And I'm very thankful for Kadri Simpson and Ditte Jørgensen working on progress with the UE methane regulation we will see in the next years. And it's a very interesting regulation, and we're going a big step forward for tracking and reducing methane emissions in the energy sector. And this is a really big success for the European Union and an important part of the climate policy of the European Union. This legislation is a clear signal to all producers of gas and oil and coal importing to the EU. Fossil fuel producers must be transparent about their emissions by using equivalent monitoring, reporting and verification standards at the EU, and will set a maximum methane intensity level for oil and gas imports. And the oil and gas industry needs to adapt monitoring standards like the level 5 of OGMP 2.0. Routine flaring and venting can and must be reduced massively within the next few years, and we can do it all together. We can make big steps forward with this strong greenhouse gas reduction here. But I think we heard already what Kadri Simpson talked about it. So that's our big step forward in the European Union, and we hope to work together there with our global partners. And I'm very thankful that we can work on this here, even with countries like Egypt or Algeria. And it's a pleasure to be together here on this event and to work on this together in the future. I think it's only a part of the whole emissions, but we can achieve a very fast advantages, and so we think that must be done now, and I hope we will come out with good achievements in the next months and in the following year. Thank you very much.
Now, thank you very much to Stefan Wenzel for the German perspective and the importance of reducing the emissions that come from the fossil energy, as long as there is fossil energy as part of the energy transition. We have heard also from Minister Al-Molla about the Sharm el-Sheikh outcome on methane, the roadmap for methane reduction, and of course in implementing that roadmap, in bringing the results as regards the reduction of methane emissions, we need industry to engage and are working with companies. So with that, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers and move on to the next roundtable, which is with some of the companies involved in methane reduction, in investing in methane reduction, including between the European Union and Egypt and other countries in the region, to hear about their efforts to reduce emissions. Thank you very much to Fatih Birol, Kadri Al-Molla, and Stefan Wenzel. So we are ready to start again, this time with the company's perspective. I'm very grateful that you have both been able to join us. I'm joined here by Lapo Pistelli from Eni, the Italian energy company, and I'm joined by Vijay, sorry, I can barely, Swarup, is that correct? My apologies, my eyes are, yeah, I have difficulties reading it. And you're a Senior Director for Climate Strategy and Technology at ExxonMobil. So thank you very much for joining us, both of us. As we just talked about, we are going to need, we have the technology that is needed to reduce methane emissions relating to fossil energy. We need investments into that, and companies are actually taking action and working closely together. I know, Lapo, you are working with countries in North Africa, Egypt, Algeria, and with energy companies there to make a significant investment into the reduction of methane emissions that result from work there. As you will know, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced that by next year's COP29, we will be putting forward a roadmap for how exactly do we achieve our objectives when it comes to you collect, we buy. So the collection of methane emissions and the use of those methane emissions into the energy system for more energy security and for the economic case. Lapo, can you tell us a bit more about the Eni approach to that, please?
So, Dieter and distinguished guests, thank you for inviting Eni to speak today. We have the urgency of taking action to reduce emissions and transform our energy system, and I think this is not a choice. COP28 is a cornerstone event which will mark the credibility for everybody, and it requires responsible action by everyone. And we know that gas in the conversation is still an essential part of the transition pathway. However, the entire oil and gas sector is committing to decarbonize its operation, reducing its direct emission through energy efficiency and electrification, and starting from the most powerful source of emission related to natural gas, which is methane emission. So in our long-term strategy towards being carbon neutral by 2050, which includes the decarbonization of the energy and products we supply, so it's not only about Scope 1 and 2, but also about Scope 3, nearly Eni is strongly committed to reduce methane emission to near zero in the short term. And this is our action. We have declared our support to the Global Methane Pledge. We have worked with OGCI to launch the Aiming for Zero Methane Emission Initiative, and we are a signatory of the Methane Guiding Principle Initiative. Here at COP28, we are reinforcing our commitment as we are supporting the COP28 presidency OGDA on methane and the new World Bank Gas Flaring and Methane Reduction Trust Fund. But as these are our results so far, I would like to highlight it that as for today, our upstream methane intensity is around 0.08, significantly less than 0.2, valued as the best practice for the sector. But as operators, we must also act on increasing the credibility of data. To further improve the accuracy and transparency of our methane emission, following the OGMP 2.0 standard that were previously mentioned by the German minister, we have this year achieved the gold standard. But abating methane emission must be a shared effort. So in the OGCA framework, we have contributed to the launch and deployment of the so-called OGCI satellite monitoring campaign that will use satellite technology to identify and monitor solutions for methane emissions abatement on 50 amongst the most emitting assets. And yet we are glad to see that this campaign is being profiled as one of the methane lighthouse projects by the COP28 presidency. Reducing methane emission doesn't only involve minimizing its release, but it may also extend to finding alternative ways to utilize it. Embracing initiatives that convert methane into usable energy is a win-win for both the environment and the industry, and methane valorization can turn a greenhouse gas into a valuable energy source. Therefore, dear Dieter, we truly appreciate the initiative You Collect, We Buy launched from the EU. So we come to the routine flaring. In 2014, we joined the Zero Routine Flaring initiative launched by the Global Gas Flaring Reduction Partnership of the World Bank, a significant lever, I would say, for reducing the emission intensity of upstream operations. And with the aim of bringing forward routine zero flaring in our operated assets in 2025, well in advance compared to the GGFR target fixed in 2030, we have been implementing natural gas valorization project with significant investment in building gas valorization infrastructure and delivering access to energy in countries like Nigeria and the Republic of Congo. Today, we see opportunity to curb gas flaring thanks to the project in North Africa that were mentioned before, and to valorize the raw gas through existing production facilities in Western Africa for the production of LNG destined to export and eventually to the EU market. Therefore, we are partnering with the NOx, the national oil company, making available our experience and technologies we have developed all along these years. And in particular, I'm glad that Tarek was here. Sorry that the Algerians were not here. But in particular, in Algeria and Egypt, we are working with Sonatrach and EGAS to identify opportunities for the reduction of greenhouse gas emission with a focus on methane and energy efficiency initiatives. But I would like to tell you all that we are working on similar agreements in Libya and here in the UAE. Beyond Eni's experience, methane is an issue that requires a cooperative effort among operators, governments, and international institutions. So, Dita, let me tell you, we fully support the first ever EU methane emission regulation proposal, which, as you know, aims at reducing methane emissions in the energy sector in Europe and in its global supply chain. And we also welcome that the EU regulatory framework is built on the OGMP 2.0 standard. At the same time, we see the need for the EU to establish dialogues with producing and exporting countries and to initiate a regulatory cooperation agreement to support the equivalence with the upcoming EU regulation. So to conclude, I think that the significance of the meaning of all these commitments lies in two major challenging objectives. The first one is securing the sustainability of the energy industry, and the second one is guaranteeing at the same time the most effective energy transition. And I think that we can achieve both working all together. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Latko, for providing insights into the Eni approach, including investing in the region and here in the country and in neighboring regions and supplier countries. And I would now, and also mentioning the oil and gas methane partnership 2.0, which is of course critical in relation to the reduction of methane emissions. And Vijay, if I may ask you to take the floor, I know you have just recently signed up to the OGMP 2.0, and it would be interesting to hear a bit more about that and why did you sign up now and only now, please.
Well, thank you very much for the, can you guys hear me? Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be on a stage with you. And thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to talk about a very, very important topic. The theme of this COP is acceleration. How do we accelerate? How do we go faster? And I'll talk about that in a minute, but I want to bring in the context of OGMP 2.0. Let me answer your question directly as to why now. My background is in technology. And the fundamental reason why now is because of the technology evolution. Companies like ours operate at scales that are almost unimaginable, and scale across 2 or 3 dimensions. First dimension is just magnitude. We produce a lot of oil and gas. The second dimension is geography. We produce gas and oil in many, many different geographies, over land, over sea, different places like that. And third is the complexity. Those 3 together require different technology solutions. So when we were looking at OGMP and we're thinking about how do we sign up for something and make the commitments that we want to make, because we stay to the commitments that we make, it's really the evolution of the technology. And some of it's already been talked about today. We have much better detection techniques. We have much better measurement techniques. Satellite technologies have come a long way. They continue to come a long way. The ability to integrate imagery with our process data to understand where the leaks are so that we can clear up the leaks. So OGMP provides a framework to move down the pathway to go from estimation to calculation to measurement. And underneath that is all the reporting. And I think that's very important because it's already been said today, you respond to measurement. Now let me talk about some of the things that we've been doing, because even though we just joined OGMP 2.0, that doesn't mean we haven't been committed to reducing methane and reducing methane emissions. In fact, I think we have some of the most aggressive targets and some of the most aggressive accomplishments in methane reduction. Not only have we made similar commitments as Eni, but we've also set an objective to be net zero by 2030 in the Permian. And I want to bridge to another theme of today, which is collaboration and technology transfer, because we think we bring a lot to that, and we think our industry brings a lot to that. And I'll give you an example, and then I'll think about something as we go forward. I'll give you two examples. First off, we understand how to detect and mitigate methane detection. Like I said, we've already talked about some of the progress we made in the US, but we've taken that type of learning, that fundamental knowledge that we have as a company, and applied it to Germany, where we've reduced about 95% of our emissions over the last 20 years. We've taken that knowledge and said, we're going to be more aggressive in the Permian, set a 2030 target, take that same knowledge as we think about Pioneer and say, here's a company that had a 2050 target. With what we know and what we think we can transfer, we can make that 2035. That's a 15-year reduction based on technology transfer, based on capabilities. Which brings me to the final thing that you talked about, which I want to raise, around collaboration. So if this is about acceleration, then it is actually about collaboration. And the Oil and Gas Charter, the OGDA Charter that we signed, talks about that. There's a section in that charter that talks about knowledge transfer, technology transfer. That's going to be critical. That is one of the fastest ways to close the north-south divide. It's to share best practices, it's to share technology, to share learnings, so that we can all benefit from this. So as the technologies come up on how you take away the gas and you monetize the gas, as the measurement, as the advanced analytics continue to advance, the developing nations, the South, doesn't have to go through that learning curve. The developing nations, in fact, can start where the developed are leaving off. And that is a very fast way to accelerate. So as we think about what we're trying to do here this week, and this great seminar that you're holding here, let's think about a couple things. We have to continue to produce and supply the needed energy. We have to continue to do that while reducing emissions. Methane is a very first hurdle on a multiple hurdle journey. Why? Because the technology's there, and the framework is there, and the impetus to collaborate is there. So let's start with methane, but let's remember this is a broad picture that comes back to a couple fundamentals. We need technology at the right scales, we need collaboration, and we need facilitating frameworks to be able to drive that. I'm optimistic about the future. I'm amazed at what we do with energy today. I know we have tremendous potential to continue to improve, and these types of discussions and these types of forums are critical to driving that type of behavior and that type of collaboration that's needed. Thank you very much for the invitation to join.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vijay, for that perspective, and welcome to the OGMP 2.0, which really is an important setting when it comes to the reduction of methane emissions. Now, several of the speakers from both the government and the company side, the industry side, have talked about the importance of technology and the importance of data, correct measurements, in order to be able to secure reductions and know what exactly are we reducing and how much. And I would like to invite Stephen Hamburg to join us here. Stephen, you are Chief Scientific Officer of the International Methane Studies at the International Methane Emission Observatory, our key implementing partner under the Global Methane Pledge. So if you have to leave, you will have to leave. Then that's good. I would suggest,
Okay.
yeah. Good.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, and it's really a real pleasure to be here, and to have created this scaffolding for what I want to talk about has already been described. Whether it was Vijay talking about the technological revolution, and as was presented, I want to just look back just a little bit to 2 years ago, when IMEO, the International Methane Emissions Observatory, was first announced at COP. And the Global Methane Pledge was signed and has now grown to more than 150 countries. IMEO made a commitment to bring the data to the problem to catalyze the change. Now, we were still in early days. I've got enough gray hair. I've been working on this problem long enough. I can go back another decade. And how far we have come in that time. In those last 2 years, and it really, though, we need to think about where are we going? Well, we need to go to radical transparency. What do I mean by that? Well, we've sort of heard bits of that already. We need to be able to understand this problem at a scale we never did before. A dozen years ago, when I started making measurements in this area, we had incredible debates with industry and whatever, and it wasn't acrimonious because none of us had data. Everybody would say, well, I think. That wasn't the basis on which we could action. We have come a long way, but we don't currently have the transparency, the quantity of data to answer the 3 basic questions. Where are the emissions? How much are the emissions? And how are they changing over time? What IMEO is committed to doing is to bringing that data together, integrating it, so we're not looking for one place and another place, to having a single hub, and where the data are in conflict, acknowledging that conflict, and then we've got to resolve it. But we need to do that in a way that we aren't doing for any greenhouse gas currently. You can't go to one portal and see where those emissions are, understand how the data was collected, and get a clear picture. Right now, we have a fuzzy picture of what's going on. It's a lot better than it was, but it's still fuzzy. We need to put on those glasses, get it sharp, get it spatially resolved, get it actionable, and I think we can do that. IMEO is on that journey because of the support of so many that have been in this room, whether it's the European Commission. We just heard a wonderful announcement from the German government. It is collaborative, as we just heard about. It's not about doing anything than creating that really crisp, clear picture with the tools to use that data to have a revolution. And that revolution, Vijay stole a little of my thunder, is underway. We already have better satellites today than we had 2 years ago. And we will have much, much better 2 years from now. Why does that matter? It matters because we now have the capability of looking across the globe, independent of whether one can get access on the ground or in the air, to create a comparable set of data for every major oil and gas producing basin in the world. This is absolutely critical if we're going to be able to allow that conversation and action to occur. We heard about MARS, the Methane Alert and Response System, as the first major tool in that data revolution of making data publicly available, and it was launched here already to be able to alert people to things that are happening with the technology coming from space. But it's only the beginning of that revolution. But I'm confident that that revolution is coming. And part of it we heard also about Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0 and the work that's done with the many companies to increase their own awareness of what's going on and report on that in a way that is structured. So we need to look forward, and where will we be in 2 years? We will be able to talk about this problem with clarity and with detailed information. That's a big promise, but I think we're literally going to see that happen. We will have the data when we do that to have the kind of information necessary, as we heard about the new regulations coming online in 2030 in terms of the full value chain across the globe of importing gas around the world. We can create a methane supply index based on empirical data. The challenge we've had is so much of the data we use is calculated on a set of assumptions, which doesn't encourage those who are doing better because it's a lagging indicator, because the factors don't change fast enough. So if you improve your production, you don't see it, which is the production practices, you don't see it. So we are in a good place. I'm all for revolution in this case. Those of you who know me, I can be very conservative in my approaches, but this is revolution we all want. This is revolution allowing us to act responsibly and to be able to deliver on the promises that have come from this COP. And I look forward to having the stage 2 years from now with the same group and others and showing how we've delivered on that promise. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you so much for helping us put on the glasses that we need to get the clarity for methane emission reduction. And I hereby extend an invitation to you to join the EU Energy Days at COP30 2 years from now and provide an update and hopefully deliver on this very encouraging promise. Thank you very much. We now will have a very, very short break before we move into the second half on methane, so please stay with us. We're going to be discussing international cooperation and financing, and we'll hear from a further number of our partners. Thank you very much for now, and we'll continue in just a couple of minutes.
Given the greater global warming potential of methane compared to carbon dioxide, methane emissions management is an important focus area. And it's why we continue to reduce methane emissions across our operations using flare gas recovery systems and regular leak detection and repair programs.
The framework for OGMP and the emissions quantification provides a really good insight for operators into materiality of their emission sources, which allows you then to deploy capital in a cost-effective way to reduce emissions.
We believe it's collaboration and collective efforts that are needed to advance meaningful change at a faster pace. And this is why we signed up to the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0.
We're actively quantifying emissions using a multi-scale approach, being transparent in the emissions that are associated with our product is extremely important for investors, for public utility commissions, for regulators, and for countries.
What would you do if someone told you that we could save almost 2.5 million lives and reduce global crop losses by more than 30 million tons a year, and curb climate change by up to 0.5 degrees Celsius in the near term at the same time? Would you act? Back in early 2012, 7 partners did just that. And the result? Welcome to the Climate and Clean Air Coalition to reduce short-lived climate pollutants. Now with more than 50 partners. The CCAC is the first global effort to act on this urgent issue as a collective challenge, uniting governments, companies, and civil society, and complementing efforts to reduce carbon dioxide. After more than a decade of scientific results, a powerful case for fast action has been built that can no longer be ignored. What are short-lived climate pollutants? Black carbon, or soot, from inefficient brick production, millions of small cook stoves, diesel engines, and other sources. Methane emissions from landfills, and from the oil and gas industry, and other powerful greenhouse gases like some hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, which increased by approximately 8% per year from 2004 to 2008. But won't reducing these pollutants cost too much? Many of these efforts could actually save money. For instance, harvesting methane as a fuel and boosting energy supply, or preventing leakages from oil and gas distribution, and improving the efficiency of stoves and brick factories. So what are we waiting for? Technology exists. Now we need the will to act. The coalition is rolling out fast action, leveraging high-level political will and bolstering existing efforts, catalyzing financing, raising awareness about best practices and innovative technologies, such as eco-friendly refrigerants, forging new partnerships with key actors, for instance with cities to harvest methane from landfills, and addressing SLCPs worldwide for scaled-up climate and clean air benefits. The coalition is growing rapidly, with a 7-fold increase in less than a year, with new governments and key non-state partners continuing to come on board. Dangerous climate change cannot be avoided without rapid and deep cuts in CO2. But fast action on SLCPs offers complementary quick wins in the short term, globally, and especially in sensitive regions like the Arctic. If you were told you could save lives, boost food security, and reduce global warming by up to 0.5 degrees Celsius over the next 30 years, what would you do? Support action on reducing SLCPs, including through the CCAC. Make your mark for a sustainable world, now and into the future. Learn more about the CCAC at www.unep.org/CCAC.
From above Earth, satellites provide an exciting opportunity to tackle climate change. Satellites can help us monitor emissions of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas and the second biggest driver of global warming. This is the reason why UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory announced its groundbreaking Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS, at COP27. MARS is the first global system providing actionable and transparent data on methane emissions thanks to satellites. In near real time, it then alerts companies and governments about large sources.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience as we're setting up the second half of this methane emission reduction discussion, an important part of our energy system, a critical action to reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions, and work that calls for international cooperation, working with partners and securing the necessary financing. And Rick Duke, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate at the US Department of State. That is exactly the reason that the US and the EU jointly launched the Global Methane Pledge 2 years ago at COP26, and the reason we're here to take stock look at how far have we come and what more needs to be done. So if I may start by giving you the floor to give the US perspective on this, please.
Thank you, Ditte, and thank you for the partnership over the last 2 years, and really before that, in the run-up to COP26. It is really compelling to see, after a launch with 100 countries at COP26, now 155 countries in the Global Methane Pledge, all working together to cut methane pollution at least 30% globally by 2030, which is the minimum that the science requires for us to keep 1.5C within reach. That, of course, is because methane in the atmosphere now accounts for 1/3 of today's climate change. And so it's really important that the world is stepping up in a serious way. We saw at the summit just a couple of days ago here that China, for the first time, agreed that it would include non-CO2, above all methane, in its 2035 Paris Agreement target next time, for the first time ever. That's equivalent to taking the 3rd largest emission source in the world and putting it squarely in the Paris Agreement architecture. So that's exemplary of what is happening with this work together. And we are also seeing tremendous action to improve measurement of methane emissions, which of course allows us to manage those emissions down. That includes multiple elements. We have a significant resourcing of the satellites that are required in order to get the better data in place with more and more precision and real-time frequency. But we also have the International Methane Emissions Observatory synthesizing those data, making them meaningful for the world. And we're really pleased to be partnering with the European Union and others on IMEO in that regard. And then finally, we're seeing the tremendous innovation in how those data, once synthesized, can really be put to work. And that includes things like the IMEO Methane Alert and Response System, or MARS, which is now fully operational as of COP28, and which will be vigilantly watching for emergent super-emitter events and providing governments around the world that participate in the system and national oil companies and others the real-time information to do something about it, to really step up and address those leaks, address that wasted product and the climate change that they are contributing to. We also see in other sectors important innovation in how methane data can be and are going to be utilized, including with a really fantastic launch of the Lowering Organic Waste or Low Methane Initiative, which is meant to get at the 1/5 of methane emissions that come from the waste sector. And here's a sector where, again, as in so many cases, we see massive co-benefits. When we address landfill and dumps problems, we're improving public health, we're dealing with plastics pollution, but we're also cutting methane, which is such an important part of the climate problem, and by the way, is a major air pollution precursor and even hurts agricultural productivity. So lots of co-benefits when we can flip that around and use ever better data, ever better synthesized in a way that allows us to actually act on the global methane pledge and cut methane at the pace and scale and comprehensiveness required. And we're seeing just huge progress here at COP28 in converting from putting this higher on the agenda to actually starting to get the work done together in a serious way.
Thank you very much, Rick, for that vision and that path ahead in our continued work on the global methane pledge. Indeed, a great cooperation, and I think one that has already brought very, very good results, with more than 150 countries having joined. I would like now to turn to Marcello Mena, who is CEO of the Global Methane Hub. The Global Methane Hub has been instrumental in the last years in providing financial support to the scale-up of the cost-effective solutions in methane mitigation. So could you tell us a bit about what are the next steps? What else is needed from the international community to turn the Global Methane Hub or the Global Methane Partnership commitments into actions and make the data actionable? We have just heard from Stephen about the data and the progress that we will be making over the coming 2 years in that. So I'm grateful to hear your views on that. And if I may request, we're a little bit short of time, so unfortunately I'll try to accelerate a bit, please.
Yes, thank you. So the first thing is that we have a lot of momentum. The US, EU, China summit recently, and talking about for the first time, including all non-CO2 pollutants and NDCs, opens up a world of opportunities. We have now the funders that have helped create the methane fund double their funding to 450 million in grant funding for these coming years. And the fact that the EU has adopted these import standards, when implemented, these can, by themselves, reduce global oil and gas sector emissions by 33% and get us 1/5 of the way of meeting the global methane pledge. And so I wanted to congratulate you for that. The CBAM itself and the import standards aren't protectionist measures, as some say. These are basic pieces for free market economy with free trade, and we will support that and the transparency to make this happen. We are also launching the Methane Data to Action campaign, which will help fund these satellites, linking that satellite with users. So oil and gas companies can know where the leaks are. Civil society could also point out where these emissions are occurring, and also to provide integrity to all the commitments. The charter that was established yesterday for 50 companies is very important, but we will only be sure if we have third-party verification for these commitments. And the markets and the pressure of markets to only allow those lower emission sources can be a really great piece, because on the other side of the Pacific, you have Japan, Korea, Australia, and other countries are also interested in having low emissions oil and gas sources. So we're part of this helping you implement. We supported IMEO in $10 million with Bezos Earth Fund recently. Google.org provided additional $3.5 million, and I do think that the cornerstone of transparency will help us meet these standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that update. And indeed, it is about transparency and being able to measure and therefore able to take action. Of course, all of this requires financing. We've heard it from governments. We hear it here now. And I'm glad, therefore, to be joined by the World Bank. Subin Bamji, you are program manager and work on global flaring and methane reduction partnership, a really important initiative set up by the World Bank. So I would be grateful to hear from you this new trust fund that you're setting up. How will that help and how will that support methane emission reduction, please?
Okay, thank you, and thank you to the European Commission and the European Union for inviting us here today. Been very exciting COP, as some of the previous speakers said, especially for us, because after about 2 decades of working on flaring in developing countries, helping governments with the least capacity and resources to address flaring, we finally have stepped up our commitment, and thanks to some governments and companies, we're happy to announce a new trust fund called the Global Methane and Flaring Partnership. And what we hope to do with this new partnership and this new funding that we expect is to focus on the projects now. So you can remember that we worked on technical assistance, capacity building, doing analytical work to help these governments address flaring. But we'll continue to do that work, but in addition to that, what we want to do is really help these governments and NOCs work towards the projects that will have the emissions reduction. I do want to thank the governments of Germany, the United States, the UAE, Norway, and then I'd like to thank also ENI, Total, BP, Equinor, and Oxy. These are companies that have stepped up, are providing the funds to help these developing countries address methane and flaring. So that's what we're excited about. And one of the things I'd like to mention before I hand off to my fellow panelists is some of the criteria that we will be looking for when we use these funds. So number one will be a commitment from the government or NOC to do long-term programmatic approach to flaring and methane reduction. So what does that mean? Well, OGMP 2.0 that you've heard from many people today, we think is a powerful tool and instrument. We will advocate for it, and we will help governments and NOCs achieve the standard required on OGMP 2.0. And if a government or NOC would like to access the funding at the World Bank, we hope that they will either have OGMP 2.0 in place or work with us to get it in place. The second thing that we'll be looking for is our own initiative, zero routine flaring. The government has to make a commitment to end routine flaring by 2030 if they'd like to access the funding. We think that's important. As you all know, we have, I think, almost 100 companies and governments making that commitment now. So good progress there. And then the third thing is a methane intensity target. We'll be looking for that from any government or party that would like to utilize the funds that have been provided. So again, we're excited. We really think we should be able to move the needle. And last point I'll make is these funds will be for activities like methane detection surveys, pre-feasibility studies, everything that's required to move a government or a company towards doing the actual project. And then we will also support finding the financing to do the projects, which we know is a big gap, but that's something we want to support and assist with. If the World Bank doesn't do it, we'll help find the financing for it. So we're excited and look forward to engaging with all the partners in this room and outside the room. Exciting COP for us. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Sumi, for that update. The important trust fund, which really can help create the right incentives and the right framework working with governments and companies. I would like to stay a bit on the financing side because the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is another institution that provides significant financing to methane emission reduction initiatives. Harry Boyd Carpenter, you're Managing Director for Climate Strategy and Delivery at EBRD. And I would like to hear from you on the basis of the projects you have helped finance. What are the lessons learned and how can we make sure that financing institutions that the action taken, that the support is effective in terms of reducing methane emissions. Please.
No, thank you, Dieter. I mean, we signed up to the Global Methane Pledge at COP26, and that reflects our conviction that you have to be in the high-emitting sectors to be effective. And we've been working intensively since then, and indeed before then. What have we learned? Well, we're making progress in waste. We've been able to do quite a number of landfill management projects. We're actually making progress in agribusiness. We have quite a number of biogas projects managing that. We are really struggling in oil and gas. And that's a bit hard to understand because that's probably the sector where it makes most economic sense. So in the interest of time, I'll try to give you 2 lessons for it. One is we are really struggling with the data, and I was very interested to hear from Stephen. The IMEO is a very important counterpart for us in all of this, but we are really surprised how hard the survey and the measuring is. To be frank, we thought it was going to be easy. It's not. You know, we go do a measurement, and we discover that actually you need to stay there, you need to come back again and again and again. So don't underestimate the data crunch. And the second thing is regulation. We need more regulation, and you won't hear this often. In fact, Dieter, I'm pretty sure you've never heard it from an Englishman. But please, regulate more. We love the ETS. We love the import regulation. We really like the new EPA rule, even though we don't operate in the US. We like it because it sends a message globally that if you are a player in this sector, you can't ignore this. You have to get on top of it. So if there's one message, more regulation, please.
Excellent. And indeed, I think it is probably the first time, but I really do appreciate it.
And probably the last as well.
I really do appreciate that. I think both the reference to the importance of data, the important work carried out under IMEO, but also the fact that we have now both in the US and in the European Union put in place clear regulation as regards methane measuring, monitoring, verification, and what that means in our energy use. I will now turn to the last speaker of this session, and we're going back to the Eastern Mediterranean, again, the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum, another organization that plays a critical role in terms of methane emission reduction. It's a pleasure to welcome you here, Osama Mubarak. You're Secretary General of the organization. And if you could say a few words about how can regional cooperation support the action on methane emission reduction, please.
Thank you, Diti. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be in this distinguished panel, and thank you for the invitation. So I think the EMGF is all about collaboration. Our main objective is how can we come together as government and stakeholders to develop the resources in the East Mediterranean. But we cannot develop these resources without taking due consideration to how can we make them low carbon sources for the diversification of, not just for Europe, but also for the globe. So this is definitely, collaboration is the key word for us. And what we are doing actually in decarbonization is last year, we managed to launch our EMGF decarbonization initiative during the COP27 that is all about setting out outlines for plans for projects for decarbonization. And part of these plans, we did them through a marginal abatement cost curve, and the quick wins, and the most important quick wins is methane abatement, whether talking about venting, flaring, or fugitive emissions. So this is what we are really working on. We're also part of the observer through the MMRV initiative that is led by the US and the EU. And also this year we are focusing more on harmonization of policies and regulations for the region to our EMGF members, and also trying to develop a carbon intensity certification mechanism for the region. I think this is important, that it has to do with a lot that has been talking with the previous speakers talking about, whether talking about transparency of data or talking about measurements and the reporting and all of these things. So we have a plan over short, medium, long term. 1 year, 1.5 years is short term, and then long term over 5 years. How can we turn the EMGF to be accredited certifier for carbon intensity certification? That would definitely include methane. So although methane is a quick win, it's most of the methane projects, methane abatement projects are feasible, but to do this, still we need regulations, we need technology, and we need funding. All of these things need a lot of collaboration, and this is what we are trying to do as EMGF. I think maybe my last point is that one of the real advantages of the EMGF is that it's not just only about governments. We have the governments, but we also have what we call the Gas Industry Advisory Committee, where we have 38 members, which are which are NOCs, IOCs, technology companies, and even some financing institutes. We have the World Bank, we have EBRD, and also we have the regulators and the scientific institutes as well. So I think bringing all these stakeholders together is important to accelerate decarbonization.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Osama, for your words. And that brings us to the end of this session on methane emission reductions. We have learned about the importance, first of all, of data, measurement, making sure that we have data so that we can take the right action in the most effective and efficient way. We have heard about the importance of partnership between private and public sector, between countries, between governments, in regional organizations. We've heard about the importance of financing, establishing the right financing instruments, and for those instruments to relate to the data and to the regulation. But we've also heard about the economic case for reducing methane emissions. We have heard from companies about You Collect, We Buy, and the important programs set up there, where we hope to come back at COP29 with a roadmap for that, before we then come back to the perfect data at COP30. So we will be looking forward to that. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for joining. Thank you for your insights. And please stay with us for the next session here at the EU Energy Days. Thank you.